Good morning, everyone. My name is Maslin Jongwe, and I am going to be your moderator for today. And I'd like to welcome you all to this exciting journey towards becoming a data protection pro. Data protection is no longer a luxury but a necessity. In today's landscape, where data breaches and cyber attacks are increasingly common, the demand for skilled data protection professional has never ceased. Whether you are a seasoned professional looking to upskill or a welcomer to the field, this guide is designed to provide you with the knowledge, skills, expertise needed to succeed in this critical and rewarding field. Today's topic is entitled The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Data Protection Pro. I'm really glad to see that we have different participants from different regions and countries such as Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. And I would like to welcome you, and I'm very excited to have this diverse and global audience. Your presence and your commitment to data protection is well appreciated. And today's, we actually have a presenter. Our presenter is a remarkable guest speaker who is a trailblazer in data protection. So in terms of our presenter, he is a doctor. He is called Dr. Orlando Olumide. So Dr. Orlando, he is a managing partner of Training Heights. He is also an ISO management system auditor. He is also a governance risk and compliance auditor. He is an enterprise architecture program director and a trainer, over 23 years of experience in the field of management consulting, computing, and information technology delivery, and he has worked to support over 1,000 clients in West and East Africa, and representedly helps organizations to adapt international standards and best practices in information technology. Dr. Orlando has a variety of certificates from his profile. He got a lot of certificates such as COBIT, he got TOGAF, he got ISO 2701, he got ISO 2701, he had ISO 22301, he got ISO 31000, which is the risk management. He has ISO 27035 to mention just a few. He also have the cybersecurity manager. Mr. Orlando's profile is really well overwhelming and very motivating. So his presentation is going to last for about 30 to 40 minutes. And after that, we are going to have question and answer session at the end of his presentation. So if you have any questions related to the topic of today, please just write your questions in the chat box. Dr. Orlando is going to address all this at the end of the presentation. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. And now this is our time to hear from our expert speaker, who is Dr. Orlando, who is going to share his valuable insights on becoming a data protection pro within our organizations, within our different countries. So don't forget to put your questions in the chat box. Thank you once again for being here. The floor is yours, Dr. Orlando.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Marceline, and all the organizers of this event, as it is. So I'm going to speak for about 30 to 40 minutes very quickly. I'm going to try to condense what we typically will do over a 4-day training period. I'm going to try to condense it into some kind of 40 minutes. So I'm going to bring 4 days down into 40 minutes very quickly, just so that to give you some kind of insight into what privacy is and why you should be concerned. So once again, thank you very much for being here, to all our attendees, and even to the organizers in themselves as it is. So I'll just go ahead with my presentation. But before I do that, what is privacy? What does it mean to everybody? Can everybody go? Let me rehear from everybody before I jump into it. If we go to the chat room, what is the privacy and data protection? What does it mean? What does it mean to everybody? What does privacy and data protection? What does it mean? You can go to the chat room. You can switch on your mic, whichever works better for you. But I want to hear from everybody. What does privacy and data protection? What does it mean? Anybody? All right. Can I hear from anybody? What does it mean? The idea or the concept around privacy and data protection. What does it mean? What does it connote? Can anybody speak, or can anybody type into the chat room? I want to hear from at least two people before I move on. All right, can I hear from two people before we move on very quickly? I've got a lot of experts here. I've got Harrison here. I've got Matthew here. I've got Prisa here. I've got Shadrach here. So I've got Vanessa here. I've got Vincent here. I've got Voice here. So I have so many people on the call. I've got Brighton here. So can anybody either switch on your mic or just go into the chat room and tell me what are your thoughts and your opinion? What is privacy and data protection? What does it mean? Right, just so that I have an idea of what your thoughts are relative to this. Can I quickly get responses, please? Thank you very much. In the chat room now, Voice says, data protection is the process of safeguarding important data from corruption, compromise, or loss. Right, a Voice, that sounds like information security and cybersecurity. That's what that sounds like, right? So I won't say you're wrong, but you're very much tilting towards what we will say for information security or cybersecurity, because that's what you do, right? You protect from CIA, isn't it? Harrison says, ensuring data subject rights is being protected. Now, Harrison is definitely beginning to get into the core of privacy in itself. So yes, I like that, Harrison, that the rights. So you can see when you start to mention or say things like rights, you start to say that there's a legal side to this thing. When you and I start to use the word rights, it means that there's some legal side to the conversation in itself. And Priska says, privacy could be secretive or not meant for public sight without consent. Okay, well, secretive, not meant for public sight will be very much about information security and cyber. But I like the way you added consent to it, which is the privacy conversation. All right. One of the things we're going to look at is what is the difference between information and cybersecurity versus privacy. What does privacy mean? Where does privacy come in? And things like that. Marcelina Cell says it's about PII, and I agree. I agree. It's right. It's about PII. It's about data minimization, purpose limitation, transparency, and consent. Right. So it is. I agree with you, Marceline, completely. So thank you very much, everyone, for your responses. Well, yeah. So let me just go straight. I hope you can see my screen. I'm about to share my. Is my screen is up? Can everybody see my screen? Everybody, Marceline?
Not yet. I can't see your screen.
Okay. Any other person?
Yeah, I can see it.
I can see it.
Okay.
Oh, so it's from my end.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So today I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to try to say many things within the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to talk about privacy and data protection in itself. I have a one pager that I'm going to put some highlight some things around the data protection bill, the Malawi data protection bill, and we're also going to talk about other standards and approaches that people use when it comes to privacy. Different countries have their own privacy guidelines and standards. If you're working in Europe, then you're going to be worried about what they call GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. But you know, if you're working in Africa, in different parts of Africa, the GDPR might not necessarily apply to you, and your own country might have a GDPR documentation that supersedes every other thing. I've worked in many countries in Africa. Kenya's got their version, Ghana's got their version, Nigeria's got its own version, Malawi's got its own version. So different countries have their own version of this. Different countries have their own version. So, and that's important, but there are also international standards that exist, and we're going to look at them. So I'm going to try to speak about all these things in a couple of minutes, and please capture a couple of highlights, and yeah, I'm sure I'll be happy to take some of your questions as it is. So the thing that I've seen across Africa is that most of what we do in Africa, we kind of leverage what they've done. Globally, everybody leverages what they've done from a GDPR perspective. That's what everybody leverages. So it's almost like GDPR is almost like the foundational document when it comes to data protection and privacy. Is like the main document that everybody leverages, is like what we can refer to as some kind of best practice framework for data protection. So from there, most countries will then go develop something that is uniquely theirs, and which I see across a lot of African countries that I work within, so to speak. So if you look at this, this is the one that belongs to Malawi. You will see things like number 8 on my screen. So you see, what does personal data mean? And what does it mean to process personal data lawfully and fairly? So every organization has now got to define what that means to them in line with the bill that has been passed, or an act. I think it's beyond a bill now. I believe it's a full act now. You also see things like a purpose limitation. That means this is different from the days where people would just collect any kind of data. Now everybody is worried about the kinds of data that they're collecting, and they need to have a justification for even collecting that data in itself. So because in modern day, you don't bother collecting what it is that you don't need. If you don't need it, if it's not going to be useful for you, it becomes a burden if you collect it. So that's what we mean by you limit the amount of data that you're collecting based on the purpose that you really need them for. Then you have conversations around how do you minimize data? So you've collected the data, it's in your custody already, but how do you minimize its use? How do you ensure that the use of the data in itself is lawfully used, is appropriately used? So because you've collected it does not mean you can use it for any and everything. So you see number 8, number 9, and number 10 on my screen. You also see number 11 that now starts to dovetail into information and cybersecurity, because there it now starts to say things like data accuracy. So you know what we call CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and that accuracy is one of the characteristics of integrity. And then we also talk about availability. So you see that there's a close marriage. There's a close marriage between between information and cybersecurity and privacy. So there are lines where they intersect, but there's also a difference. There's also a clear difference between both of the, between when you're talking about information security versus privacy. And then you have many other concepts like the limitation around how long you want to store the data for. You know, if it's card data, you store it for a certain period of time, and you're not even allowed to store sensitive authentication data at all. So the storage limitation, there is the integrity of the data and confidentiality. Once again, you're dovetailing into information security there. And then there's the big conversation around number 14 that speaks about consent. Do you have consent to even collect or to use the data in itself? And then, so you start to talk about the rights, the rights of the data subject, the owner of the data in itself, and them giving you the rights to even collect and the rights to use that data for lawful purposes in itself. And then, of course, you see number 15 there that speaks about information provision of information to a data subject. You know, they have rights. They can come and tell you, I don't want you to do this with the data that you have. Then you've got your own responsibility as an organization, because once again, you've collected sensitive information from people, and that becomes a challenge. And you've got to be able to, that becomes a challenge, and you've got to be able to do you've got to be able to treat the data that you've collected appropriately. Then you have some other provisions when it comes to children and people that have one that are incapacitated in one area or the other. And then things like criminal offenses related to people and things like that. And lastly, here, well, not lastly, if you go to the middle section, you'll see things like various rights. And here we need the lawyers to help us interpret this for each organization. Though there is a bill, or though there is an act, the interpretation of this, or better still, let me not use the word interpretation, let me use the word, the implementation and the execution of this, it's unique to every organization. So every organization still has to take the bill or the act, and they've got to implement it for their own organization. So this is a big deal. So you can see access to personal data, how you can port the data from device to device, from region to region, from location to location, and many other things around the right to object and things like that. And then, of course, who is the controller? Who is the processor? Who am I handing over my data to? If I'm handing it over to the bank, either the controller, either the processor. If I'm handing it my data, I want to get a SIM card, and I'm handing my data over to a telco provider, a telecommunications provider. Where do they come in? Are they the controller? Are they the processor in themselves? So there's a lot that is tied to this, and it's funny because I did quite a bit of work in Ghana, and they came up with theirs in the year 2012. That means they've had this for how many years? 2012 into 2022. Am I right? That should be what? 12 into 22. And that means they've had this for about 13, 14 years. And people do the filing on an annual basis, but most of those organizations have not really implemented this data privacy, because in Africa, we cannot do the filing, we cannot dance around it, we have one policy or the other, but we don't really do this implementation. This is still new in Malawi specifically, so it will make sense, and I encourage you as an organization or as representatives of your own organization to spend a lot of time just getting this right, to spend a lot of time to ensure that this is implemented. I see organizations who go ahead and implement information security and cybersecurity, but they don't realize that the privacy in itself needs a lot of implementation, and the implementation is beyond just the policy. There are so many things that are involved when it comes to the implementation in itself. I can speak about this all day, but I am limited by time, and I still want to show you a couple of things in my slides. So just the key takeaway here is everybody needs to implement this, and it doesn't matter what country you're in or you're from. Everybody needs to implement this, and they need to implement it appropriately. There's a consulting and implementation work that is involved. There's training that is involved. There's an audit and an attestation piece of work that is also involved. So if you're going to do this, make sure your organization does this appropriately. As you go away from this webinar, make sure that you make a point in your organization. Make sure it becomes one of your strategic initiatives for this year or for the year 2025 to say to yourselves, we need to implement this bill or this act. It needs to be appropriately implemented in our organization, especially if you're coming from any kind of financial services related organization, if you're coming from any kind of telecommunications organization, if you're coming from any kind of fintech, any kind of organization, even every government institution needs to implement this. The government institutions, whether it's immigration, whether it's the passport office, whether it's the national identity office, whatever that government institution is, whether it's the guys that do your water management or the guys that do sanitation and come to collect your bins, they all have your personal data, and all the government institutions in themselves also need to implement this standard and related ones. Once again, I can talk about this all day. Let me move away from here. But the very important things that you need to take into consideration, as I said, let me go away from here. GDPR is a big deal. Most people learn and pick from GDPR. And this is, I mean, when we were looking at, because this is not the first time, we're having a training in a couple of weeks' time. I believe we have a training in a month from now, which is the data protection training. And we did it some months ago. We're doing it again for people from your parts, I believe on the 5th of August, I believe. And we already have some clients that have even registered for that training that Epic Cyberminds is organizing. And one of the things that we said the last time we had the training is there's so many things that you need to take into consideration. There's so many things. And when we looked at the Malawi document, they did not put the percentage of they only made a flat fee. But if you look at this, any organization in a year from now that has not imbibed or appropriately adopted the standard, they said here, you get up to 4% of your turnover, all right? Or 20 million euros. That is a lot of money. Now, for a big organization, 20 million euros might be small. And then they can get to do 4% of their turnover, which can even be 100 million euros. But the one for Malawi, they did not write a percentage of the turnover. They just gave a flat fee. I remember we were looking at that in the document. So there's still a bit lenient as at today. But the GDPR is not lenient at all. It means that you might even lose as much as 100 million pounds because they will take whichever one is greater. They're not taking the lesser, they're taking the greater. It also means that if you're a small organization, if you're a small fintech or a small insurance company, and you're not being up to this, and you're in Europe and you run into trouble with data protection, you can pay as much as 20 million pounds, even if your revenue as an organization is just 10 million pounds. Right? So because it's the greater value that the regulator is going to be your penalty. So this is a big deal. So you can afford, as a country, this is still new. And I know people are from different countries that are also here, but all of you need to go away knowing that this is a big deal. If you go onto the job portals in the UK and in different parts of Europe, and you just put data protection, there's so many jobs every day that comes out for data protection because they can't afford to throw away 20 million pounds in penalties. And imagine that their organization, 4% of their turnover is more than 20 million euros, more than 20 million euros, then this even becomes a bigger deal for them. And that's why this is one of the areas globally that people are looking for experts. And Africa is not doing very well from this perspective because the governments and the authorities in Africa, they're not really taking these into key consideration. And then, of course, you've got so many concepts in here. Privacy by design, the rights to be forgotten. How on earth do you do this? And these are the kinds of things we talk about in that 4-day training course that we're going to be having on the 5th of August. And it's a virtual course, and all of you Epic Cyberminds are organizing it. I will be the trainer, just like as I was the trainer a couple of months ago when we had an earlier version of it. But this is a big deal, and all of us should take this into keen consideration. Let me move on once again. I don't want to spend too much here, but please have a look at this standard, especially for those of you that are that your organizations work in many parts of the world or many parts of Africa. So I have banks, for example, that are working in different parts of Africa. This is one of the standards you can decide to adopt, and you can even see that there's a new version. This new version came out just some months ago, 3-4 months ago this year. I believe it came out in February. And this is a privacy document that is not dependent on you having implemented ISO 27001. Let me say that again. This is a privacy framework that is not dependent on 27001, which is the information security standard. So companies can adopt this because they might need to work across different countries. In my own organization, this is what we have adopted. We work in different countries, and we don't want to meet the privacy documents in each country. So instead, what it is that we've done is that we've adopted this, and everywhere we go to, where people say that, oh, have you done this, and we show them this. So this is very important, and this is essential as it is. So you can take this into consideration, and it's not heavily dependent on 27001. It's dependent, but not heavily dependent on it. But there is another one. This is the new version that is going to come out. Now, this one is 100% dependent on 27001, which is the information security standard. If you have not implemented 27001, which is for information security, you cannot implement this. So while the other one is not very dependent, this one is 100% dependent. You're not even going to be allowed to adopt this if you have not yet implemented information security. And I dare say to all of you, information security is the foundation and the baseline and the background on which privacy and data protection sits on. So in reality, you shouldn't even be doing anything that's got to do with privacy and data protection if you have not yet implemented information security. It's important that you get on with your information security journey, or you do them simultaneously, which is the other recommendation that I have for organizations. You get your privacy done simultaneously with your information security, because the privacy makes an assumption everywhere around the world, whether it's GDPR, whether it's the Malawi document, whether it's the Ghana document, whatever document it is, it makes an assumption that you already have information security. So it's almost like information security is like nursery or primary school, while privacy and data protection is like secondary school that sits on top of that. Please bear that clearly at the back of your mind. So once again, you can see that this particular standard is called PIMS, the Privacy Information Management System. It sits completely on 27001, which is for information security. I need to move on very quickly because of time. I know people think that everything in that information security is equal to privacy, but not exactly, right? Privacy has got its own unique areas. So, and that is why this is how I say to people: for a privacy professional, we kind of expect that you know information security, right? Because you won't be able to do privacy appropriately if you don't know information security at all. You will struggle. You will struggle. However, for some information security professionals don't know anything about privacy. So they have a good chance to know it. They've got a background to be able to know it. But it's an assumption just because you know information security or your CISSP or CISA, one of those things, it's an assumption that you're automatically a privacy expert. No, that's not true. Nothing could be further from the truth. Because you know information security does not automatically mean you're an expert in privacy, except you take the time to learn it. And if you're a privacy person, it's also expected that you have that background in information security. So these things are very important. Once again, this thing is extremely essential that you know what this is and you understand it. When we talk about information security, we're always interested in CIA. It's always about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. However, when we talk about the extra piece, so in modern day, nobody really talks about CIA alone. Everybody talks about CIAP. This is the big conversation in modern day, CIAP. This is the big conversation in modern day. And that's where you start to talk about the P there represents privacy. And that's where all the things around the rights of the data subjects, the right to be forgotten, limitation of collection, the limitation of use in itself, and similar type things, and even things around limitation of retention and those kinds of things. That's where they come in as it is. So modern day, everybody's worried about not just CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but the P now significantly comes in. So for everybody that is here, this is useful for everybody, right? Let me just put it, yes. So if I do this, this is important. So people don't realize that there's a huge piece of work that needs to be done here. So yeah, so your data protection commission in your country and your data protection act. So if you look in here, everybody, so I think I use this for clients of ours, but these are all areas of work, everybody. So if you say you're going to implement this is minimum number of things you're meant to do in your organization. This is the minimum you're meant to do. Where you have data DPA there, it means Data Protection Act, and where you have DPC on number 15 means Data Protection Commission of some sort. There's a lot of work to be done if you're implementing this for your organization. So if all of you get out of this room or get out of this webinar and all you're able to take with you is a slide like this that says that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done for us to implement this Malawi document or to implement any of the international ones, that this is not something we're going to gloss over. This is not something we're just going to have one policy and put the policy on our website and we're going to say, oh, because we have this policy and the policy is made available via our website, automatically we're compliant. It's more than that. It's significantly beyond that. So this is the minimum, the absolute minimum that any organization needs to put in place for data protection and privacy in their organization. This is the absolute minimum. And it's a lot of work to do. It's a project. Implementing data protection in your organization, it's a full-blown project. It's not a small project. It's not a partial project. It's a full-blown project in itself. Okay, good. Let me move on here. Once again, as I said earlier, I'm going to try to condense a lot of things into this few minutes, and I'm going to try to round this up in about 10, 15 minutes. But these are the kinds of things, all right? Because we use this training slide even in the actual training in itself. So we have these kinds of conversations. And this is where the actual engagement starts. These are like the top 6 questions you've got to answer at the very beginning of putting this in place in your own organization. At the very minimum, these are the top 6 things you're going to need to answer. What data are we collecting? Where are we collecting it? Why are we collecting it? Where are we storing the data? How do we have to transfer it? How do we process it? What about things around retention? These are the minimum that we need to answer. It's almost like when you say you're gathering the requirements at the very beginning of the engagement in itself. Minimum set of things you have to think about, and that you've got to be able to address upfront, even before you go ahead and launch into the full project in itself. I move on very quickly. Because of time, I can't go through all this. There's also a lot of confusion around terminologies. And there's a technical side to this piece of work, and I'll show you a couple of things. There's a technical side to the work. There's a database side. There's an Oracle side to it. There's a Microsoft SQL Server side to it. There's a MySQL side to this piece of work. So this piece of work is not just something you're going to just play with or ignore. There is a massive side to it in itself. Anonymity, anonymization, anonymized data, the consent, identifiability. How do you opt in? What exactly is even referred to as personally identifiable information? And I'm going to show you that or a sample set in a couple of minutes. Who is the controller, right? Who's the principal or the data subject? Who's the processor? What is the bridge? And things like that. It's a lot. It's a lot. Even just getting through with the definitions and the interpretations of concepts and words is a big side to the work in itself. I move on very quickly. Concepts like pseudonymization is a technical concept. To anonymize and to pseudonymize data is done at the database level. It's done by system and database administrators. And that's the other challenge. People think the other challenge, right? That's the other challenge. People think that privacy belongs to the lawyers or belongs to people only in compliance. But privacy is more than that. It's more than the thing that belongs to lawyers. It's more than the things that belong to lawyers and people in compliance. There's a technical side, there's an IT side, there's an information security side to privacy. And I'll show you some of those concepts in a bit. I picked this from 29100 because I like the 29100. I like it a lot personally, right? And it's very much aligned to what you have in the Ghana document and the Malawi document. And it's also extremely aligned to GDPR in itself. But you can see some key things here. So if you look at 5.4.5, that's technical. If you look at 5.4.6, that's technical. If you look at how you work around the unsolicited PII and the sensitive PII, that's technical. If you look at 6.4 and 6.5 and 6.6, those are technical areas of the work. So what I try to do here is that I put the yellow areas as non-technical, while the green areas are the technical areas. So there's some technical work that is involved. And this applies irrespective to whatever privacy documents that you're implementing, whether it's a GDPR, whether it's a Malawi document, all these things, they apply. They do apply, okay? And you can put your questions in the chat room. I'll go into the chat room in a couple of minutes and I will look at some of the questions and I'll answer them. So if you've got questions, if you've got thoughts and your opinion, right, you can put them in the chat room. This is another thing. So that I do a lot of enterprise architecture work. This is another thing that needs to be done. If you're a bank, somebody needs to put up this piece of work, the data protection architecture. Somebody's got to do this. Somebody who understands how data works in the organization has to spend some time putting together a data protection architecture in itself. This is important. This is extremely important and it is essential, right? I have this slide. This is probably the most important slide as far as I'm concerned. If your organization is is an entity and you're collecting any or all from this list of 36 data sets, then you need to implement privacy. If you're collecting all this, and you need to implement privacy, and how you implement privacy is it has to be customized to each organization. Some organizations here collect 5 of these things, or collect 10 of them, or collect 20 of them, whatever. Then you have to actually implement privacy and data protection appropriately. And the way you're going to treat this data set might be different from each one. The way you're going to an account opening form where the regulator says, the banking regulator says you need to collect date of birth. It might be different from medical history that pertain that you might need to collect in an insurance company, a life insurance company. The other thing that most people don't take into consideration is the privacy applies to customers, applies to employees, and supplier data. Privacy applies to customer, employee, and supplier data. That means sometimes people think about privacy only tied to their customers, not tied to their employees, and not tied to the supplier information that is in their custody. There's a lot of thinking that is involved. If your organization is collecting these things, then you have to really think about how you're going to get the implementation done appropriately and intelligently. I move on very quickly. This is one other area, right? You've got to go back and review the forms that you have. Your account opening forms, your biodata forms, your vendor registration forms, your KYC forms, your complaint forms. You've got your conference forms. You've got to go back to review all your forms. You've got to go back because you now have to subject these forms to many principles. Should we even be collecting this information? Should we even be collecting this information in the first instance? And if we collect the information, how do we treat the information? So you start from the collection in itself, and then you start to deal with how do we treat these things even within our databases? How do we treat the information that we lawfully collect within our databases, and how do we ensure that we're retaining in line with what the regulator is saying and appropriately tied to the Data Protection Act? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the thinking around the business forms that you use, whether they're physical forms or electronic forms. There's a lot of thinking that has to go. And these are the places where you actually start the work in itself. Once again, there are many technical concepts that are within the concept of privacy. There are many technical concepts within privacy. And then you talk about pseudonymization, anonymization, which one is reversible, which one is irreversible. How do we apply each one depending on the data set that we're collecting? How do we apply each one depending on the data set that we are collecting? Okay, so then of course you have concepts like masking within the database that also applies within privacy. How do you mask? How do you determine what to mask and from who? How do you determine what to mask? How do you do the masking in itself? Who do you end up doing the masking from? Right? And once again, that's important. All right? We're going to talk about sensitive information, what is sensitive, what is not sensitive, what do we collect, what should we not collect, and many other things. I can talk about this all day. As I said, I can do this all day. We're going to be having the training from the 5th all the way to the 9th. And that's a big deal that we're going to be having of August. So we're going to have literally an entire week to have this conversation. This is also one of the places you can start from. Your organization can start to say, we're going to put in place a data protection and privacy policy, but it's not just to put it in place, it's to also execute it. You know, I do a lot of audits in my day job, and I tell people that having a policy is not a problem. Everybody can have a policy. When we come to do the reviews, we want to check whether the policy has been executed in the organization, because a lot of organizations have policies that have not been executed. Once again, it's one thing for you to have a policy, it's another thing for you to execute that particular policy. So everybody needs to have something like this. It needs to be signed off by the executive, and it needs to be executed and communicated. And people need to go through an awareness relative to this itself. All right. And so in the training we're going to be having in the month of August, the idea is to turn as many people as possible into data protection officers. Is to turn as many people as possible into data protection officers who end up being the champions and the ones that drive data protection initiative in their own organizations. They end up being the ones that drive data protection and privacy initiatives in their own organization. So ours is to make sure that when you come for the training, we equip you adequately so that you can function as a data protection officer in your own organization, driving and championing the conversation around data protection. Okay. This is also very important. So, I mean, it's a big deal to get this done. If you want to get data protection done for a medium-sized organization, you will typically need somewhere between 3 to 6 months. For a medium to large organization, you will need about 3 to 6 months. You might need an entire year to get the implementation done and to get it done appropriately. You might need an entire year to get the implementation done and to get it done appropriately. You might need a whole year to get it done. Get it done appropriately. Okay. And there are many other parts, and that's why I said information security is the foundation on which privacy sits on. There's so many things that is expected that you put in place if you plan to do this and you plan to do it right in your own organization. Right. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, if you look at this, it tells you about the tips for protecting your PII. So when people want to look at privacy as just something that lawyers and compliance people do alone, and they want to ignore the technical side, I also know that they're not doing the right thing. It's a combination. It's got some technical parts to it, and it also has some legal and compliance parts to it. It's got some operational parts to it, but it definitely has some technical sides to it. Right, so I'll just show one or two things and I'll just stop. This is in data protection, we talk about something called DPIA, the Data Protection Impact Assessment, which is like risk assessment, really. We don't use the word risk assessment in privacy, but that's really what it is. It is risk assessment. So the same way you do risk assessment in business continuity, you do risk assessment in information and cybersecurity. There's also risk assessment on the privacy, but we don't call it risk assessment. We call it data protection impact assessment, which is a fanciful word. So DPIA is a fanciful word for risk assessment. This is also another conversation that we have in terms of how do you approach this? When do you do it? How do you do it? We'll also share templates with you during the training and after the training in terms of how you go to get this done in reality. And then, of course, there's so many. I mean, I use a lot. I've seen clients or worked with clients that use AWS and Azure to do a lot of the implementation around this. That's important. And then people have dashboards that they're using to report on this on data protection and privacy, live, real-time dashboards. Because once again, companies don't want to be, they don't want to be fined and they don't want to pay a penalty tied to this. All sorts of dashboards that I've seen different organizations implement relative to data protection and privacy. Okay, so this is the training we're going to be having. It's going to be sometime on the week of the 5th of August. And it would be nice for as many people as possible to join us. We're spending the entire week exploring different things. So it's a big deal. There are many areas to the work. Epic Cyberminds are the ones. So, I mean, there's so many areas to it. Apart from the lectures, there's so many templates, there are exercises, there are all sorts of quizzes and questions, but we take it from a practical perspective because we're not just interested in people passing an exam, we're interested in people going to implement and to champion and to drive privacy in their own organization. So this is typically what the week looks like. We start on Monday and then we take it all the way to Friday of that week. Good. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I know all of you, your work, but you've taken out of your very busy work time to be here. I wanted to speak about these things, and I believe I've spoken about them adequately. So questions, thoughts, and opinion as we bring this to a close. Okay, they said we're going to have a special picture. That'll be nice. All right. Good. Thank you, Marceline. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc, for your presentation. We have learned a lot. And for now, let's just go to questions. Team, if you have any questions related to the subject that Doc has presented, kindly just type in your questions in our chat box. He's here for us to answer all these questions. So we have the first question, which states, how do we ensure that third-party processors and controllers comply with GDPR requirements?
How do we ensure that what?
How do we ensure the third-party processors and controllers as well comply with the GDPR requirements? We might comply as an organization, but in terms of the third party.
Oh yeah, so I mean, there's only one way by which everybody does it in modern day. Part of your procurement will then state that they can't work with you any longer. They can't bid for work, and even if they have existing contracts, those contracts are going to be cancelled, except they meet the privacy requirement. That means they must implement and they must get an external party to do some kind of attestation that they've done the implementation properly. That's the best way to do it. Once you do that, everybody's going to fall in line.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to the next question. The next question states, in relation to data minimization, majority of existing laws and regulation on financial crime monitoring and terrorist financial require that data processors collect as much information as possible on data subjects. That's our KYC form request to a lot of information. Do data protection guidelines provide guidance on such?
Okay, good. I like your question. That usually happens, and I hear this all the time. It's almost like when you have, should I say, contradictory sometimes, contradictory laws, compliance requirement. So the central bank says you should take all this, but privacy, it kind of it says that you should not take too much. So you've got to, it's a difficult balance, but there is a balance to it, where you now have to be able to balance what the law says or what the what the regulator says and what data protection is saying. Now, the truth is that some of those things that you don't need to collect. So you're going to have to review the forms that you use in collecting them. And you also have to go back to what the regulator is saying. And I mean, banking regulator, telco regulator, any of those regulators, and say, where exactly did they say that they must collect the phone numbers of all my wife and my kids and things like that, and my parents? Have they said that specifically? Because I have to be certain that that they themselves have said that I must collect these things. Now, if I'm convinced and I'm certain that that I must collect these things, then I can justify these things within my policies and within my procedures, saying that the regulator has said I must collect these things, so I'm collecting them from all my customers. Now, that now puts further work on you, because the KYC says you should collect it, but data protection says if you now collect it, then you must treat the things you've collected in a certain way, and you must treat them appropriately. That now shifts the responsibility onto you to now treat all the KYC information that you've collected in such a way that they're secure, they're safeguarded, and the consent and the rights of the people and their rights to be forgotten and things like that is also not violated. So it's a delicate game of balance, but the balance is there nevertheless. But it's a lot of work, and that's why people need to be able to sit to look at what it is that their regulators said, what it is that the Data Protection Act is saying, and what is it that they are actually doing as an organization. So you've got to work around those three areas, so to speak. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And another comment. Okay, the presentation looks to cover several things other than the usual. I guess the training will encompass everything step by step. Yeah, the training is going to encompass a lot, and Doc will be one who is going to be the trainer. So let's attend to this training. There is more to come. So another question. Would we say collecting data by banks for a loan application seem freely provided, or just an obligation in order to access the loan facility? If the contrary, are the banks liable for collecting the data? That's the question. Should I repeat the question? Okay.
Okay.
Could we say collecting data by the banks for a loan application seem freely provided, or just an obligation in order to access loan facility? If the contrary, are the banks liable for collecting the data?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The banks are the organizations, and that's the challenge, right? So I want to come to take a loan from you, right? That's the challenge, right? I want to come to take a loan from your organization, right? I've come willingly, so you have to give me a set of forms. But data protection now also now says that in providing the forms to me that I've come to take the loan, you're now bound by many things. You're bound by, first, though I need the loan from you, don't collect information that you don't need to collect from me. That's number one. Peradventure, you collect that information from me, you must treat the information in a certain way. That's number two, you as an organization. Number three, despite me willingly giving you my information, I still have rights. I'm the one that needs the loan. I'm the one that is giving you my information. Nevertheless, I still have rights. And you as an organization, you're bound to still ensure that you fulfill my rights, so to speak. So the organization, so I've come to collect the loan. You would give me a set of forms to fill. You have to give me the conditions. For you that you're collecting my information, you're now bound to almost serve me from many perspectives tied to the data that I've given to you. So it really just brings a lot of burden onto organizations as it is, but that's the way of the world as of today, and there's not a lot you and I can do about it.
Thank you, Doug, for answering this question. Another question states, on consent management, where do you draw the line on limitation, the purpose of collection to use of data for marketing, research, advanced analytics, predictive analytics, e.g. recommendation to take up products, etc.?
Absolutely. So once again, all these things are tied to the forms and the contracts that you make people sign. So if you're going to collect my data, you're limited in terms of what you can do with it. Now you can use it for internal purposes, or you're not necessarily allowed to use it for marketing purposes. And if you're going to use it for marketing purposes, then the consent form you might have provided to me, I must be able to say, I agree that you can use this for this purpose. So it's a big challenge. There's nothing new in here. Everybody in the world is going through this because you and I traditionally we're used to collecting data and then leveraging the data that we've collected purely for our own purposes. Now we're now bound to say that the data that we have lawfully collected, we have to meet your rights, and we're also now restricted in terms of what we are allowed to do with the data in itself. So it's a balancing act. You've got to look in the fine details of the act that you're looking at, whether it's a Malawi document or it's the ISO document or it's the GDPR document in itself, to say, what does this say? And you also have to balance it with what your regulators are also saying. And that's why I keep saying that it's a balancing act in itself. You've got to take the Malawi document, look into the fine details of the document and use that to craft, that's just one document coming from the Data Protection Authority. But you also have the documents that are coming from your individual industry regulators, insurance regulators, banking regulators, telco regulators, manufacturing regulators. You now have to put all these things together and then marry them in such a way that you're not falling victim or falling foul of any of them. It's a difficult piece of work to do. The way you say, where do we draw the line? It's not an easy line to draw. Nevertheless, it's a line that needs to be drawn by people who've been appropriately trained and they know what exactly it is that they are doing and what they need to do. Okay.
Okay, another question seems like that's our last question. How can organization effectively balance the need for strong cybersecurity measures with ensuring user privacy and maintaining the compliance with data protection regulations?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think anywhere where you use the word balance, right, it's never easy, right? So even you and I are trying to balance different areas of our lives, emotional lives, spiritual lives, academic lives, our professional lives, and even our physical health, isn't it? So all of us we're all always trying to balance. Balancing acts is a big deal, so to speak. So it's not easy to achieve that balance. Nevertheless, it's a balance that can be achieved once you have people who are knowledgeable in terms of both. You can't have somebody who knows privacy alone trying to balance cybersecurity and privacy. You also can't have it the other way. The guy only understands cybersecurity and is trying to balance it with privacy that he does not know. So you literally, and I know I showed you a diagram like that, you literally have to be an expert both on the cybersecurity side and on the privacy side to be able to balance them appropriately. So yeah, it can be balanced, but it's got to be balanced by a very knowledgeable and skilled professional who knows both the cybersecurity side of things and the privacy side of things. And yes, I will share some bits of the presentation with you so that at least you come in here, you will get you get some things that you can take back into your own organization. You can see that I skipped a lot of things. That in itself is from a training document, but yes, we will share some of these things with you. Okay, good. Thank you very much for having me, everybody. It's been my pleasure to be here. I've definitely enjoyed myself, and I look forward to seeing all of you, or as many people as possible, on the 5th of August in our training class. Thank you very much. Have a great remaining part of your day and an excellent weekend. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Lin. Mr. Lin,
Oh,
are you
sorry.
there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Sorry. Thank you so much, Doc, for explaining the GDPR and the presentation. It was really insightful, and we have managed to understand what is required for one to comply to the related regulations being in our countries, being in our organization. This was really helpful, and we look forward to more of these webinars, to more of those trainings. So before we end up our presentation, I just want to explain in terms of like what Doc stated, the training is going to be held from the 5th of August to the 9th of August 2024. So who should attend to this training? This training can be attended by anyone. When we say anyone, we are saying any person who is who want to learn about the subject of want to learn about the subject of data protection. I guess you can see my presentation that I'm presenting. Yeah.
Can see it.
So you can see it.
I can see it.
Okay, Doc, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can see it also. Yeah, we can see it.
All right, thank you so much. So Epic Cyberminds is going to have this training, like which was stated by Doc, and this training is the GDPR, which is Certified Data Protection Officer training. And if you need to ask any questions related to this training, this is the email for Epic Cyberminds, and this is their contacts. You can contact them anytime. And Epic Cyberminds, they are an authorized partner with PECB. So this training is going to be done virtually, meaning anyone from anywhere can join this training. And Doc will be is going to be the trainer for this training. So like I stated, who can attend this training? We are saying IT practitioners can attend to this training. DPOs and individuals responsible for maintaining conformance with the GDPR requirements can attend to this training. Members of information security incidents, we can't run away from this training. We need this training. Who also has to attend? Those people who does business continuity teams and technical and compliance expertise seeking to prepare for data protection officer role. He has to attend to this training. All legal experts, they have to attend this training for the compliance, for the Data Protection Act. Experts, advisors involved in security and personal data can as well attend to this training, as well as everyone can attend this training, which is the Certified Data Protection. So things that you can expect from the training package. The training package has things such as interactive sections delivered by highly qualified trainer that fully reference the general data protection. And one of the trainer is going to be Dr. Orlando. A thorough walkthrough of the GDPR. I think he tried to explain to us what the GDPR contains, but in terms of our time is limited. So let's come in and attend this training where Doc is going to actually explain all what is required. Then certification and exam fee included in the price of the training course. So your training in terms of the money that you're going to pay, it contains even money for your certification as well as the examination. You will be provided with official training course material, which is very explanatory, informative, examples within it, and best practice, as well as quiz from PECB, which is one of the best internationally recognized trainer, and an attestation course completion with 35 CPDs, which you can use in different boards, being in ISACA, being in PECBs, as a credit, which shows your continual learning after you have attended the training course. In case you do not pass the exam, there is a retake within 12 months, meaning you have 1 year to even retake in case if you are afraid that you might fail the exam. So, but with all the materials available, the exam is easy for you to pass. So this is a sample of the certification that you will receive after obtaining this training. So after passing, candidates have a maximum period of 3 years to apply for respective credentials that you require, and this is the sample that you receive after the completion and after you have passed the training. So this is what we have, and before we end our session, I just want to firstly thank Doc for presenting to us, like what I stated. And Doc, thank you so much. And we have understood, you have talked a lot of things that if we start talking about, we won't even finish. You talked about the penalties that comes after we don't comply, like the Malawian law that has come through. Companies, organization has to comply. So I think attending to this course is the best. And Doc, your insights and expertise has enlightened us. Thank you so much for your passion for data protection. We and also to the audience, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for joining this forum. And we look forward to see you in the training. Your presence and engagement has made it a great success for us to have this webinar. And together, we are making a difference in the data protection in our different sectors in our industry. Remember, this training can't just be, this data protection cannot be just learned in a day. We need time to learn and grasp the concepts. That's why the training is going to happen. And also, I think we can switch on our cameras and have a virtual photo shoot. Wherever we are, let's just switch on our cameras. Let's just see each other where we are.
Right. See, it's good to have people's cameras. I never would have known that, Marceline, that you're
Let's
this
switch on
beautiful.
our cameras. Let's see each other.
Marceline.
Yes.
As I said, I never would have known that you're this beautiful. You see, it's good to see people in person. You look like
Thank you,
you look
Doug.
like an international model, as it is. So
thank you, Doug.
right.
Let's have a very I'm taking some. Let's thank you guys for joining. We look forward to see you in the training.
Ready? Alrighty.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.